because what I'm going to share today, I think it's a little bit like heavy, to be honest with you. And I'm going to go through a lot of like history stuff today. Is anybody into history?
I am.
Okay. Oh, yes. Okay. Awesome. Okay, so we have a lot of people, a lot of you guys love history. I'm so glad for that. In high school, that was one of my least favorite subjects of all time. But things change, right? Especially as we get older. Anybody find that like history takes on more significance and meaning for you as you get older? Like you appreciate it more? Okay. So we're going to be covering a lot of ground this morning, and I'm just going to jump right in. We're going to be talking about Bible history. For those of you that are just joining us for the first time in a while, we've been going through the Old Testament, which is difficult enough to go through for some of us, right? And we've been looking at the New Testament from the perspective of how does it point to Jesus? And we're finding that there are many times where God dropped hints, big hints, about who Jesus was going to be, about what he was going to do, about how he was the answer to the big question. And he was the plan of redeeming not just one nation of people, but all people, right? Okay, so now we're looking backwards, so we get to see all this, which is exciting. But now we're trying to kind of take this perspective of like, well, what if we weren't where we are now? And it's still so amazing to me to see this miracle of this thread that God has woven throughout the scriptures of where he was going. Okay, so that's kind of big picture of where we've been. Okay? And we're going to do a little jumping through history here. So last week, we were in the kind of the golden age of Israel. Okay? This is the age where King David was on the throne, and then his son, who was King Solomon. It was an exciting period of time in Israel's history. And here's why. Do you remember Israel it started off with one person. That was Abraham. And a promise that, you're going to become like, your descendants are going to become like the grains of sand on the beach. Okay? That's a lot of grains of sand. Okay? Michael's from Florida. You see those grains of sand. So, that's a big promise when you're just one guy, okay? And so we've traced how God has kind of like expanded this thing, right? Well, now this one person, and then this like nobody nation, or a family, and then a tribe, and then 12 tribes, and then now they're a nation. Under King David, they are established. They are recognized. They have land. They have a city, a capital, Jerusalem, right? And now with Solomon, all of a sudden they're like building this temple, this place that is to become the center of worship for the one who is the center of everything that they were, and that's God. He was the center of all of that, okay? And so this was so good. They were winning victories in the battle, and they had a relatively long period of peace. In fact, they were even internationally recognized. Because I think it was the Queen of Sheba, if I remember right, it was like, I want to come to you, King Solomon, and I want to see like all of your like treasure and all this stuff that I'm hearing about that you have in your land. They were recognized, okay? They were kind of at that place that we want to be, right? Success and things like that. And the problem is that it wouldn't stay good. Because Israel was like an unfaithful wife to the Lord. Like an unfaithful wife. And eventually, what happened is there was this divide. And this one nation started splitting. Okay? So they're building up. They're kind of becoming united. They're becoming one. And now there's like this division between... Now there are these two kingdoms. And one is the northern kingdom, which was called Israel. And the other was the southern kingdom, which was called Judah. And we're going to get into that here in a little bit. But there would be a series of kings. And each one of those kings would be judged by the Lord. And if you've read the book of Kings and the chronicles of the different kings, you see this pattern in the book, right? And it's like this king did right in the eyes of the Lord. This king pretty much flopped, okay? This king did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And you see this pattern throughout. That's how each king was like mentioned in the book, right? Were they a good king or were they a bad king, you know? And then God would show his tremendous patience, his tremendous grace over and over again to his people. And he didn't have to. And he sent the prophets, right? He sent prophets to warn them. If you guys keep doing this, if you guys continue down this path, this is exactly what's going to happen to you. He told them, he made it very clear. And sometimes they heeded his warnings, and other times they didn't, unfortunately. And they continued down the wrong road. But eventually, due to the unfaithfulness of his people, both tribes were taken into captivity. First of all, it was the northern tribe, the tribe of Israel, was taken into captivity from Assyria. Brutal. Assyria was brutal to the nations around them. Brutal. And then after some time, the kingdom of Judah was taken to Babylon. And they displaced them. Like they uprooted a lot of the people and took them to other places. So that you can't continue to establish a nation when all your people are spread out, right? And so that made things very challenging for them. So Judah at least held out a little bit longer, right? Because they had a few more kings that were like, no, I'm going to do the right thing and I'm going to follow the Lord. Whereas the northern kingdom of Israel, like every king was like just leading them down a worse path almost, right? Away from the Lord. Okay? Are you guys with me?
Yep.
I just covered a lot of history in just like 5 minutes there, okay? But here's what I want you to know. Because we're going to see this pattern begin to develop. And I want you to see this pattern because I think that it's still applicable today. All right? And the first thing I want you to know and see is that God is looking for a remnant who will follow him. God doesn't need a lot of people. He'll use a lot of people for his purposes, or he'll use an individual. It depends on the hearts of that person toward the Lord. He's willing to use as many as will come to him. And so we see individuals like Noah. Noah was like the only guy. God was starting over again with Noah, right? And then there was Moses and Abraham and Elijah, a lot of these guys. He's also used nations like Israel, right? He chose this one nation to do his work in the world. And oftentimes, he's used remnants. Now, a remnant, I don't know what you think of when you think of a remnant. I think of like a smaller group of people, right? A remnant. But remnants are kind of like the leftovers, right? It's like, hey, the majority are all gone somehow. And so this is just who's left over. It's like kind of like the underdogs, okay? Have you ever felt like you belonged to a remnant before? Like you were just kind of one of the whatever remains. For whatever reason, the majority's gone. These are like the ones that hang on at all costs. Like we're just going to hang on for dear life and hope that things turn out for the better. Okay, that's my impression of a remnant. And I think it kind of paints this picture of a little bit of a biblical remnant too. And before the captivities of both kingdoms, the kingdom of Judah really was a remnant. And here's how that came to be. Okay? A little history for you again. In King David and Solomon's time, so I told you things were going relatively well for the nation as a whole, or so it seemed. Because there were some underlying things that were happening in the nation, and there was still an underlying idolatry. Compromise. So God said that they were not to worship anything before him. They were not to put anything before him. but yet they were still doing that. Because what happened is there were all these nations around them, and they were supposed to kind of be driving out these nations, but instead they didn't exactly do that. And so they became attracted to the things that these nations did. Okay, now that, I don't think that sounds very far from our own time. And maybe we have those same type of struggles in our own lives. Because we look at those around us and we think, oh man, if only my life were like that. Or if only I had that. Or, if only I took this, that would make my life, that would make me feel better. Or, all these things that basically become these attractions that draw us in, but they're not from the Lord, right? And so really, in the end, we don't feel better. Life doesn't really get better. It's the whole grass is on the greener, it is greener on the other side type of thing. And then we realize that it never is, right? It never is. I was just reading an article this morning. You know what happened? McDonald's, at one point, 1980s, they had $1 million prize giveaway, I guess. And all you had to do is you had to find this record. Some of you guys know what records are. It was like one of those floppy records. And they'd put them in like magazines and stuff like that. And you could take it out and play it on your record player. Okay? This kid accidentally, he wasn't even really trying, but he accidentally got this $1 million winning record. You'd listen to the record, and at the end of it, it said, hey, you've won, call this number, okay? And he won the $1 million prize. So as usually happens with prizes like that, his mom had to go claim the prize. And she went and they were basically having trouble keeping food on the table up to that moment, okay? And so here they won this $1 million prize. Well, you probably know the rest of the story. Because this is what usually happens when people win money. And they don't know how to handle money. Because they've never learned to do that. Is some of it was stolen by other family members. They started a business. The business didn't go well. And the grass was not greener with $1 million. Okay? But any one of us would go I'll take $1 million.
I'll try.
Is your grass going to be greener? I would try to, for sure. I'm not saying I wouldn't try. But I'm just saying that sometimes those things, even the big promises, don't really end up being all that is. So this is what happened with Israel. They're still, even in their golden age, they're still seeing this attraction to the people around them and the gods around them. And hey, this God, if you pray to this God, if you honor him, then he'll do this for you, right? Those kind of things. So there was still rebellion, idolatry in Israel. There was also rebellion. And see, even though David's throne was established and David had united the 12 tribes of Israel, there was still dissension in the ranks. And what happened is Israel, several of the tribes of Israel, the majority of the tribes, were still kind of in rebellion toward the tribe of Judah, which was King Solomon's tribe. And eventually, that created a rift. It created a divide in the nation. Okay? Now, let me tell you this. The sins of idolatry, the sin of rebellion, sins tend to pull us away from God, as we know, and they tend to create division between us and others. Think about your own life. Is there a place where there's division in your family or division with other people? Then the chances are that someone is probably not hearing from the Lord. And actually, chances are often that both parties are not, walking with the Lord. So that's something we have to think about. Sin pulls us away from God and creates division. So the whole of Israel, all 12 tribes were united. Now it's breaking away. Okay? And there's just a remnant of the whole that continues to follow King David's family, his line. And that's his own tribe, the tribe of Judah. and also the tribe of Benjamin, which I believe was kind of a smaller tribe, but they stuck with